Hello and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Erin Holt. Erin is a high-energy, positive, real powerhouse of knowledge, of experience and information. She's a board-certified integrative and functional nutritionist with a feisty attitude and over a decade of clinical practice. In this episode, we discuss women's health, and I will just say this as a side note that we recorded this before Wade versus Roe was revoked. We discuss why we should all have confidence in our knowledge of ourselves and our bodies. You know, when something just feels off, but the doctor claims that everything is right and nothing to worry about, but you know that something is wrong? We talk about why we should trust our instincts. Erin gives you the best advice about how to set up your day for success, and she gives us deep insight as to how she radically reduced the stress in her own life. Basically, if you want no-nonsense problem-solving nutrition, you go to Erin. Before we continue, I would love to give a massive shout-out to our sponsor, Cozy Earth, creators of glorious bed linen, towels and loungewear, which have the essential benefit of temperature regulation. Go to their website, have a good look around, cozyearth.com, and use code MENOPAUSE for 35% off. Erin, lovely to meet you. Thank you very much for joining me today. All the way from, whereabouts exactly are you in the States at the moment?
New Hampshire.
Beautiful.
So I grew up on the seacoast of New Hampshire. New Hampshire has 13 miles of seacoast. It's a little tiny sliver. So I grew up there. And now we're in Nottingham, which is by UNH campus, if anybody happens to be familiar with the University of New Hampshire. We moved from the beach into the forest. We wanted to be in the woods.
Would you like to tell us a little bit more then about yourself and your background and what you're doing at the moment?
Sure. I am trained. I went to college for dietetics because I had struggled with disordered eating for 13 years. So I'm like, I know I'm going to go to school, become a dietitian. I'm going to fix myself. And that didn't exactly go according to plan. So after I graduated, I kind of really sank my teeth into more of the alternative healing modalities because I was just looking for help for myself. Then when later on in life, after I had my child, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And so that kind of like pitched me into searching for answers because autoimmunity is like a big black hole of medicine. And so I found functional medicine and started practicing that. And that's really what I do. So I'm the CEO of a nutrition company and I'm a clinician and I have a team of clinicians. So we do the actual clinical work. We run group programs as well. And then I also run a school where I train other nutrition folks in functional medicine modalities. So got a lot of pots going.
Yes, very busy indeed. Time. And home family as well on top of that. So yes, that's enough to keep anyone busy.
Family. That's a whole thing too. Yeah, I've got an almost 8-year-old daughter. I'm married. We've got a couple of dogs. So home life is a whole vibe.
In terms of perimenopause, how do you feel about it?
I have some strong feelings about it because talk about black holes in medicine. I just find that perimenopause is so misunderstood. There's not really a whole lot of resources. It's kind of just like accepted suffering, right? Women suffer and we're just like, I guess that's just what it means to be a woman suffering. And so it is really can be a pretty gnarly time emotionally, physically. So I still menstruate very regularly, but I've certainly worked with a lot of women who have gone through perimenopause, postmenopause, and it can be a real time. And I just don't think that we are equipped with enough information to really understand what's going on and what we can do about it to help.
How do you educate the women that come to you in perimenopause or even beyond and who still don't quite understand how their bodies are changing at this time?
The tricky thing about this, and this can be discouraging to hear, is that so much of our health leading in to the perimenopause period can really affect how we feel and how we navigate that time. So it's kind of like one of those things that's like, well, we can't really go back and undo what we did. But if we can, if we're happening to catch people before that time, really talking about, we can get more into the details of this later, but really talking about certain things like food, blood sugar regulation, understanding that a lot of us are taught to sort of divorce ourselves from our bodies. So we're very out of sync with our cycles. A lot of women are put on birth control to kind of, just shut it down. If we have tricky periods or uncomfortable periods or painful periods, we're just given a pill to make it all go away, rather than understand that our period health is really a reflection of our overall health. So if we kind of take all this baggage, so to speak, into perimenopause, it can be a real disaster for folks. And so part of it is just understanding that can make a big difference. But I would say that the two most important things as somebody navigates the perimenopause period is really understanding stress. I mean, I hate to even bring up stress because everyone's like, yeah, that's great. I know I need to reduce my stress, but it truly does impact your overall hormonal health. So many people want to talk about hormone balance these days, but what we have to understand is that hormone balance starts at the very top. It's the brain, it's the stress response in the brain, and that impacts overall hormone balance. So we do have to look at what's on our plate, what we have to take off of our plate, what we have to learn how to say no to. And the other big thing is dietary strategies to manage blood sugar, which as women, we're not really good at because everyone's like, I'm too busy to eat, or I skip breakfast, or I'm intermittent fasting as a way to lose weight. And so we just have this really poorly managed metabolic health and blood sugar regulation. And that can make perimenopause like rather ghoulish.
This is why I love functional medicine, because it goes right into the guts of the source of the issues. And it isn't one pill for each problem that you have. It's go to the very root, dig down, and then begin to address things that then can settle a few of the other symptoms automatically. Going back to blood sugar, for example, what would you advise in terms of diet as a simple foundation to keep blood sugar stable enough? Because I understand it doesn't have to be completely level. It can go more like rolling hills rather than shooting up peaks and mountains and troughs.
That's a good way to describe it. I mean, blood sugar is going to go up and down throughout the course of the day. That's pretty normal and to be expected. But if we have like dramatic, like the roller coaster effect of like super dramatic spikes and crashes, that's where we can start to feel low energy, brain fog, headaches. We can see, weight imbalance with that. It's incredibly inflammatory to the body. That's one thing that we need to really kind of get a handle on for perimenopause is the amount of inflammation that our body's experiencing, and blood sugar dysregulation, whether it's low or high, is wildly inflammatory to the body. So some kind of easy strategies are, or straightforward strategies are to not skip meals and to really not skip breakfast. That's a huge trend that I see. Somebody gets up in the morning, whether it's conscious or not, whether they're like trying to do the fasting or they're just like, they just don't have time or don't make the time to eat. So they might wake up and drink coffee. So if you drink caffeine on an empty stomach, that can actually elicit a cortisol and a blood sugar spike. So it can trigger cortisol to be released. It can trigger blood sugar to be elevated, which we don't want. And then we get that dramatic drop off because there's no food in the system to bring blood sugar back into balance. So skipping meals or skipping breakfast, drinking coffee on an empty belly, or doing a fasted workout. So we'll wake up, we'll drink the coffee, and then we'll go do some type of high intensity interval training without any food in the system. That's a big problem because all of these things are cortisol eliciting, and we're just jacking up our stress and our blood sugar. We're setting the day off on kind of a bad blood sugar note. And that's the thing about blood sugar is like you really kind of have to get it under control in the morning, or you will be on that sort of ping pong roller coaster like effect throughout the rest of the day. And a huge thing that I hear from my postmenopausal ladies is sleep. My sleep's all jacked up. I can't sleep. I'm waking up in the middle of the night. I would say the most common reason for waking up in the middle of the night is actually low blood sugar. It's blood sugar imbalance. So when we're sleeping, we are in a fasted state. Most of us aren't eating when we're sleeping, right? And so what happens is blood sugar kind of takes a nosedive, especially if it's imbalanced throughout the day. you get this low blood sugar dip, and then cortisol is released. Cortisol, we think about it as like the belly fat hormone, right? Like it's one of our main stress hormones, but it's actually a glucocorticoid. It manages glucose. So if we hit this low blood sugar patch, the brain is like, oh my God, this is this is not good. I'm going to die. So then cortisol or stress response gets released to bring blood sugar back up. Cortisol can be released, adrenaline can be released. And then all of a sudden you're waking up and you're like, why am I awake? Well, 9 times out of 10, it's because of blood sugar dysregulation. 9 times out of 10 is not an actual stat, by the way. I just totally made that up. But oftentimes, the majority of the times, it has to do with blood sugar. So trying to stabilize our blood sugar first thing in the morning can be super impactful to set the tone for the rest of the day, even into our sleep.
So good breakfast, what should that consist of?
I like protein forward. So if we can get like 25, 30 grams of protein at breakfast. And so my kind of rule is try to get something in your system 30 to 60 minutes after waking up. So not everybody really has like that much of an appetite for a full meal when they first wake up. So if you don't, I try to kind of retrain my clients' appetite so they wake up actually feeling hungry. So if you don't, even just getting something like a hard-boiled egg within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up, and then you can have your breakfast like when you can tolerate it, like a full meal. But something with a fair amount of protein is a really good bet. Like, so not ideal breakfast ideas would be cereal or toast or a bagel, like things that just have a lot of carbohydrates, but they don't have protein or adequate fat to kind of anchor your blood sugar.
I've been using a glucose monitor over the last couple of weeks, just out of sheer curiosity, and it's fascinating. And initially, because it's tied into an app, and it gives you scores for each of the meals, I just wanted to get good scores. So I was eating really, really, really well. And I thought, no, this is part of the reason for doing this is to experiment and see what triggers it. It does appear that the timing and the combination is really crucial. So porridge, I've been told, is not a good breakfast, but porridge with protein powder and some nuts and a bit of coconut oil, I get a 9 or a 10 out of 10. And so it's a good combination, or something like salmon and kale or tofu, scrambled tofu in the morning. But then I can introduce a little bit of bread with a meal, but on its own, it's a disaster. It shoots right up and then shoots right down as well. It's been a fascinating experiment. And yeah, protein for breakfast sets you up.
I love glucose monitors in some situations because it gives you so much. If you can kind of take the role of like gentle observer without attaching too much meaning to it, if you can just kind of watch for patterns and say, oh, that's so interesting that my body reacts in this way to these type of things. Where I find that they can get a little bit problematic for people is if people get too focused on the individual pieces of data that can kind of pitch them into a hypervigilant state where they're like, micromanaging every single thing that's going into their body. And since so many women have history of restrictive eating patterns or disordered eating patterns, that can just kind of be tricky for some people. But overall, I think doing like a 2-week, 3-week stint with a glucose monitor can give you tremendous feedback.
Great to have extra data for spreadsheets and things, if that's your thing.
I love me some data.
I listened to one of your many podcasts recently about metabolism, and you just mentioned metabolic health. Can you explain that for those who don't quite understand what that is?
Metabolic health is really just a catch-all term for all of the cellular processes that are happening in your body. I think we've sort of come, because of like things like Shape magazine, for example, we've come to associate this term metabolism to mean like, like whether or not we can lose weight, or, it's very like, we look at it through the lens of weight loss, but metabolism is just a name for like all the things that are happening in your body all of the time, essentially. When I refer to metabolic health, I tend to use that term when it comes to like kind of like how we utilize our nutrients and how we take the food that we're eating and we break it down into like the raw materials that we need to do all of these processes in the body. And so blood sugar can really come into this discussion.
You mentioned earlier that you had lots of feelings about perimenopause. What might they be?
Well, it's kind of, I have a lot of feelings about being a woman in our society and what that all means and our role. And I just, women's health in general has been swept under the carpet. So much of
Mm-hmm.
medical research has been done on men. And so women are, we're different creatures. And we have a very different hormonal system, and we're on a very different hormonal clock. And that absolutely impacts how we respond to different things. So I just feel like we've been a little bit overlooked when it comes to medicine. On top of that, we don't really listen to women. I think we've seen that play out in movements like the Me Too movement. Like, we do not validate women's lived experience. And I see that so much. I mean, I lived it. I was going to my doctors over and over and over again saying, something's really wrong. Something's really wrong. I don't feel right. Something's off here. And they kept telling me, nah, everything's normal. Your labs look great. You're just tired. You're a new mom. This is how it goes. It's like, again, we've normalized suffering for women. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you're a new mom. Oh, it's motherhood. Oh, it's perimenopause. Oh, there's always a reason why women are suffering. And I think it's absolute BS. Like, we shouldn't be suffering. We shouldn't normalize suffering. We shouldn't normalize feeling horrible all of the time. And so the majority of the clients that I work with come to me because they were like, my doctor keeps telling me everything's normal, but I don't feel normal. I don't have a sex drive. I can't sleep. My stomach hurts all of the time. I have diarrhea or constipation all of the time. I've got brain fog. I've got low energy. I just don't feel like this is normal. And we're essentially being gaslit by a lot of healthcare providers by just being like, no, you're just crazy. How about this? How about you take an antidepressant? How about you take an anti-anxiety? We're just getting these messages over and over again that our experience, our actual physical experience, is just like a byproduct of hypochondria, or it's in our heads. And I just feel like we're really doing women a complete and utter disservice when it comes to that. And so I do think we see those same patterns reflected in perimenopause.
Unfortunately, I really agree with you. And for us over here, as far as GP training is concerned, menopause barely features. So we're very lucky. We have the National Health Service. We love our NHS. We love our doctors. They are wonderful. And it's the system that's broken. So they have a maximum of 4 hours compulsory menopause training. And those doctors who qualified, whilst that was the case, this is now currently in the process of changing, but they are now still actually are doctors. They're now the same age as the menopausal woman. I went to see not actually a GP, but a male doctor, and he dismissed some of the test results that I went to him with. I've got perfectly healthy estrogen and progesterone, which is wonderful. My testosterone is at floor level. And DHEAS also, barely in existence. And he just said, DHEA is just really irrelevant, doesn't matter at all. Not going to give you testosterone because you'll look like a pubescent boy in a day. You don't want that, which goes against everything I've understood so far, in that you can add testosterone in to get the balance. And also, to say that, I actually find quite offensive about my appearance. And then on top of that, to say, you don't want that when he hasn't even asked what I actually want. What is your opinion?
I have a lot of them. I feel like I'm just a receptacle for these type of stories because this is what I hear all the time. And I do want to echo what you said. It's like, the conversation isn't to knock conventional medicine or the allopathic approach. It isn't to knock individuals. If you go into medicine, you want to help people. You don't go through the rigmarole of med school just because you want to turn people away or gaslight them. It's the system that is broken. And I think a lot of people in the profession would agree with that as well. I just tend to get a little bit more feisty about this because I am seeing the byproduct of a broken system, because I'm seeing women, walk into my metaphorically walk into my clinic, because it's a virtual practice, and have these stories day after day after day. But what I would say to that is, I can fully understand why you would take offense to that. And you weren't asking for commentary on your appearance. So that is wildly inappropriate and should not have come up in the conversation at all, for starters. Secondly, you talked about this root cause approach. And so when I see something like DHEA and testosterone being low, I want to ask questions about why. So my first go-to is not HRT, hormone replacement therapy. I think there's a time and a place for it, and I think it can be a real helper for a lot of people. But I always want to understand, why are these hormones low, and can we swim upstream and kind of help it from the top down? So, for example, let's talk about DHEA and talk a little bit about what it is, because it's a very important hormone. I don't know why he would have told you that it doesn't matter, because it very much so does. It's actually the precursor to other hormones. DHEA is a hormone that your adrenal glands produce. So it is considered a stress hormone. It can be a marker of stress if it's high. When cortisol rises, DHEA tends to rise with it, because your body is always about, it's always about like checks and balances. So your body knows that too much cortisol scooting around in the system for too long is not great. So DHEA will rise to meet with it. It's kind of like a yin and yang situation. Cortisol is catabolic, it will break things down. DHEA is anabolic, it will build things up. So if we see high DHEA, we can infer that, okay, this is probably an active stress response. If we see low DHEA, that's kind of a problem, because that is usually a picture of depletion. It could be a picture of burnout. DHEA does naturally fall with age, but remember, it's that like buffer against cortisol. It's really a marker of resiliency. So if DHEA is low, then we're a lot less resilient to stress. And this becomes more of a problem as we age. And this is why we really have to be more mindful of our stress as we get older, just because of this normal like hormone fluctuation. The other thing to consider is if you have low testosterone, low DHEA, and there's low metabolized cortisol, this can actually be more of a mitochondrial issue, because mitochondria is where everything starts. It's where these steroid hormones get built out, the very starting place. So sometimes I can see this as a byproduct of mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria, if you remember back to like grade school, it's the powerhouse of the cell. It produces the ATP, all of our cellular energy. And so if we've got issues with our mitochondria, we're going to have issues with energy and issues with our hormones as well.
Yeah, very much so. And that is precisely what I'm experiencing at the moment. So it's interesting to hear you confirm that DHEAS is a really important hormone. I thought it was, but you know how you question yourself when you go to a professional sometimes?
Well, we're trained to seek answers outside of ourselves. We're trained to believe that we are not the leading authority on our bodies. Somebody else is. And so if we have that authority figure telling us, no, what you're experiencing is wrong, or what you think is wrong, then we do second guess ourselves, right? That's kind of like the gaslighting that comes into play. We're like, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But the truth of the matter is, like, you're right on the money. And I would say that all hormones are important. There are some hormones that we know more about. There's some hormones that we know more or we hear more about, but hormones work in concert with one another. It's like a symphony. It's like an orchestra. They're all playing together. And if one is low, we have to really pay attention to that and ask why. We don't just say, oh, that doesn't matter. That silly hormone, that doesn't matter. That's not going to affect anything. We don't do that.
Going back to the stress then, what have been your strategies to reduce stress?
Oh, I can tell you right out of the gate, making myself a priority in my own life has been huge. And I would say this is kind of the gift and the curse of being diagnosed with a serious autoimmune condition when my daughter was 1, because as moms, we're really kind of socialized to be like, oh, now that I'm a mother, I don't have needs. All of my needs go on the back burner, and everybody else's needs and comfort levels take place of my own. And so I had to kind of like flip that and reverse it, because I'm like, hey, I actually want to be around for my kid, and this disease could actually kill me. And I need to make my health and make myself a priority in my life. And so I did that. And what that looked like is really assessing the things that I was taking on. And we're really good at putting tons of stuff on our plates as women and mothers. We're not so good at taking them off. So I really kind of assess, like, what do I want to do? What brings me joy? What do I love to do? And can I do more of that? Can I highlight more of that in my life? It also, I would say the biggest thing that I've done for my stress and my energy levels is to learn how to set boundaries and to say no, which again is something that we are not socialized to do as women. We are people pleasers. We are codependent, enmeshed people pleasers. And so setting boundaries can be very challenging. But that, I would say, is the number one thing, is feeling okay with saying no and learning how to do it without a sense of guilt.
How did you learn how to set boundaries?
I started setting boundaries in my business first, and it kind of happened out of necessity because, I do have a fair amount of people that follow along with my work between the podcast and social media. I have a lot of group programs, like I said. So my energy was going out in all sorts of different directions. And I hit so many patches of burnout that I'm like, this isn't sustainable. Like, I really want to be here so I can help as many people as possible. If I can't learn how to set boundaries in my business, this isn't very sustainable. Like, I'm going to crash and burn. I'm not going to get to continue to show up in this way. That sucks for me, for sure, but that also sucks for like the thousands of people that rely on my work. So that was like kind of born out of necessity. I also really rage against this like entitlement culture where people feel entitled to access your time and energy whenever they want, however they want. I think that's something that, like, I love me some social media, but I think that that's where social media does us a big disservice, is that people just expect more and more and more of you. And I just realized that didn't feel good to me. That kind of relationship was predicated on me bleeding out. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I need some reciprocity in my life. I need to feel like it's an equal give and take. And I just was tired of like the martyr complex of like, I've got to bleed out in order to, find my own sense of self-worth. I was just done with that. And I didn't like people feeling entitled to access me in that way. It felt, I'm an empath, right? I'm a very like highly sensitive person. So I take on a lot of people's energy and I'm like, this doesn't feel good to me. So I kind of did that out of necessity. And then I felt that it was easier to do in my business. And once I felt confident setting boundaries with people in my business, then I felt a little bit more confident to do it in my family, which I feel like that's the hard stuff. Setting boundaries, like the people that you love, like internet strangers, easy peasy, no problem. But the people that like are in your life that you love, your friends, your family, that's really challenging. And so I got to practice it with internet strangers. And then I got to apply it to like people that I loved. And it's just been so instrumental in my own happiness, my own peace of mind, but also my own like physical healing to my physical body.
How are you now then? I just have to ask anyway, because recovering from an autoimmune disease, I know, is no mean feat.
No, I definitely put in some work. I put in some time. I don't have any evidence of autoimmunity. It's fully in remission. It's done and dusted. That's not my story anymore. I have moved on from that. And I say that intentionally because a lot of my recovery. So I did the boots on the ground work. I did the functional lab testing. I uncovered my root causes and my own triggers. I tweaked my diet. I did all the things, right? I did all the work. I set the boundaries. I learned how to say no. And that got me 80, 90% of the way there. I was in remission, right? I still had the presence of antibodies, but I didn't have physical manifestations of the illness. And I was like, I've gotten 90% of the way. I want to take it all the way to the 100, because it wasn't because I felt poorly, but I still had the fear of the autoimmunity. I had the fear of it coming out of remission. I had the fear of having a flare up. I still had the identity associated with being a sick person. And the way that I changed that was through the way that I talked about myself, the way that I thought. I did a lot of belief work. I had to really ask myself, what part of my ego or my subconscious is holding on to this identity? And is that still serving me? So that was kind of like healing 2.0. It's a lot of the work that I do with my one-on-one clients is kind of get into that subconscious belief, because it can really influence our health. So now I used to say I have an autoimmune disease in remission. And now I just say I do not have autoimmunity anymore. It's not my story. It's not my bag. It's not my struggle.
That's terrific news. I'm very happy about that. Had to just check in there.
Thank you.
One of the blessings of perimenopause is to reinvent yourself, the opportunity to kind of grow into yourself once you get through the roller coaster ride of the hormonal up and down, up and down. You sent an email last year, 2021, that opened up a whole discussion about showing up as yourself and being afraid to show up as yourself. And then actually, once you did, all the good things happened because you were more authentically yourself and not afraid to show everything, all the parts, the good parts, the bad parts, the slightly messy parts. A lot of us, I feel, are afraid to show that we are messy. Can you just tell us more about how that appeared in your life?
I will say that I've always sort of beat to my own drum. And I don't think anybody would ever describe me as like kind of cookie cutter. I've always have a, like a unique sense of humor. I've just been like very much so me. And I found that as, my platform grew, I started to be like, oh, do I have to kind of like dull down parts of myself? Is this too much, right? Too much. As women, we're told often that we're just too much, too loud, too big, too bold, too successful, too. And I'm somebody that's a lot of twos. I've got a lot of twos. I'm a lot of everything. Even back to the boundary setting, that was something that I'm like, people aren't going to like this. People are not going to like this at all. But I'm like, ultimately I had to check in with myself, like what is right for me? Because I cannot live an existence where I have to shift myself to be some watered down version of myself to be more palatable to the masses. I just can't live like that. It's exhausting. And I think I tried it on for a hot minute. And I was like, this isn't for me. So I just made the decision that I'm just going to show up like 100% all of the way. I'm going to say the weird things. I'm going to crack the weird jokes. I'm going to swear. I'm going to do everything. I'm just going to like live my life as Erin. And it's okay if people don't like me. Like, it's fine. Why should I think that I don't like everybody? Why the hell do I think that everybody has to like me? That's so ludicrous. That's so insane. And also other people's opinions of me like really don't matter, and I don't mean that in an egotistical way. It's just that like, I can't be bogged down worrying what everybody else is thinking about every single thing that I'm doing. I can't be so self-censored that I just like lose myself in the process. And it was definitely an evolution, and it's not something that, I have it nailed down, but it's been very freeing. And I will say that it has not harmed my business in any way. In fact, it's really benefited from it because the people that are in my community, the people that are in my energy, the people that are listening to me and taking me in, they love me for who I am because I've shown them exactly who I am. Do you know how, like, what a gift that is to just get to show up as yourself and be loved for it? Like, I just wish that everybody could do that, and everybody can. It's just, it takes a little bit of courage to just go for it. But I don't have to second guess myself all of the time, and I don't have to worry. And I just know that the people that are here for me. And that is, then I get to show up as my best self and do my best work and help the most people. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. I don't know if that really answered your question in relation to perimenopause, but perimenopause can be a great time to do it, or before or after. Like, anytime's a great time to start.
There's something energetic about being authentic in that it's freer for both the person who is their true self and the people around them. It gives permission to other people to also relax and be themselves if you are. So I love all of that. That email has stuck in my head for the best part of a year. It's not going anywhere anytime soon either. So thank you for that.
Can I just say one thing to piggyback on that about the permission? Because I think people hear this and they're like, I want to do that, but I'm afraid, or it feels selfish, right? I think that's one of the ways that we're sort of gaslit. If we do anything for ourselves, anything to really fully express ourselves, it's somehow selfish. And what I will tell you is exactly what you said. I can't tell you I couldn't even count how many women have reached out to me to say, because you did this, because I saw you doing this, because you talk about this publicly, you gave me permission to do the same. And so I would say watch because you might be hearing this and you're like, I want to do that. But then your brain, your ego part of the brain that wants to keep you safe and protected and potentially small, is going to come up with a laundry list of reasons of why it's not available to you. And I would say argue that thought, because it is available to you. And when you do it, you like light the path for a lot of other people to do exactly the same thing. And that is a true gift.
What would be your key pillars for good health overall. If you're lucky enough to catch this before perimenopause to set the foundations, otherwise, if you're in the zone, how would you best take care of yourself?
What I'm about to tell you is it's very good for perimenopause, postmenopause, but even before. It's kind of like the maiden, the mother, the crone. Applies to everybody, all the archetypes, all the phases of life. Blood sugar regulation, as I stated, is really important. And so this also, we didn't talk about this, but this also ties into the amount of sugar that you're eating, the amount of refined carbohydrates that you're eating. One thing that happens as you navigate perimenopause and into menopause, as estrogen goes lower, we get less insulin sensitive, which means we become more insulin resistant. So our tolerance for the amount of sugar and refined carbohydrates that we eat actually goes down. I do a lot of lab work on folks. And so what I see is that I don't know if it's the same marker in the UK. It's called HbA1c. Hemoglobin A1c is one of the lab markers that we look at. And I start to see that go up. I see fasting glucose and fasting insulin go up as estrogen levels come down. So that is something to really be mindful of, is that your blood sugar can kind of change. You know, if you take strategies now to just make sure that that stays regulated, it's super important. An anti-inflammatory diet is going to be huge. So think like lots of polyphenol rich foods, lots of antioxidant rich foods, all of the colors. And then make sure you're not skipping meals. I think post-menopause, some women can get away with some gentle intermittent fasting. But for the most part, if you're menstruating or even through the perimenopause phase when your hormones are on a roller coaster, it's usually not super helpful. And then the stress piece is huge. I mean, if you're wearing a glucose monitor, you can probably see that when you get stressed out, that impacts your blood sugar too. So the two are very much so interconnected. So I would say those are the big heavy hitting ones to think about.
As far as sleep is concerned, would you then advise having a snack before going to bed, to an appropriate one, which is maybe proteins and fats, in order to stabilize glucose throughout the night? Or would you think that was not necessary?
Totally depends. It's a great question. If somebody's dealing with low blood sugar issues, if they're they're kind of hitting that low blood sugar pocket that's waking them up, that is a really smart strategy, is to eat a little bit of carbs, a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein. The example I always give is like a banana or half a banana with some almond or peanut butter. And that can really help people sleep through the night. But if you have a high fasting glucose, if you have a high fasting morning glucose, if you know that you tend towards high blood sugars, that's actually typically not, I'm speaking in generalizations here, that's typically not the best strategy. A better strategy would to actually be to stop eating at dinner and then not eat until breakfast the next day.
Making sure that it's, again, a really well-balanced dinner so that it's not going to spike sugar and drop sugar even before you go to sleep.
For sure. Really, all meals should be, I'm kind of saying all of this, assuming that people know this. So thank you for bringing me back to the basics. All meals really should be balanced in terms of their macronutrient content. So the carbohydrate, the fat, the protein. I think 30 grams of protein is actually a very good goal to shoot for per meal. So not 30 grams per day, 30 grams per meal. And then having plenty of fat, and then doing what I call nutrient dense starch. So like your roots and your tubers, your sweet potatoes, your white potatoes, if you can tolerate grains, doing some whole grains or like hard winter squashes, things like that. And that can really help to stabilize your blood sugar throughout the evening as well.
Is there anything that you would like to change about the perception of perimenopause and menopause?
If there was like a one-liner of like how I would change, it's that we shouldn't normalize suffering. So perimenopause does not need to equate to suffering. And there's things that you can do to feel better. And I wouldn't just throw up your hands and be like, I guess this is my life now, because there really are strategies, lifestyle, dietary, mindset strategies that you could employ to not have such a crappy experience.
Thank you very much, Erin, for all your insight and your information. Where is the best place for people to find you? I know there are many.
I would say the top two places to go would be my podcast, the Functional Nutrition Podcast, and Instagram, the.functional.nutritionist. Functional is spelt with a K in both of those. So those are the two places you can go.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll put all the details in the show notes so people know exact spellings and how to get to you. Thank you, Erin. You take care. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Precise details of where to find Erin are indeed on our website, realmenopausetalk.com, and in the show notes. Remember to visit our sponsor's website, cozyearth.com, for the smoothest, coolest night's sleep and more, plus 35% off with code MENOPAUSE at the checkout. Please spread the word, continue to tell everyone you know about the podcast, as sharing this is what will ultimately make the difference. Look out for upcoming bonus episodes and some very exciting news, which I can't wait to share. Follow us on Instagram so that you don't miss it, or sign up on the website to the newsletter so that you are up to date with everything that is happening. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.